Hi there. It's August the 19th and we're continuing our journey through the book of Esther. And we've come to chapters 4 to chapter 7. We left the story where Haman, the king's vizier, has been angry with Mordecai the Jew because Mordecai, being the worshipper of the one God, will not bow down and do obeisance to Haman when he passes by, and therefore Haman has offered money to the king if the king will issue a decree destroying all of the Jews in the king's dominion. This is King Xerxes of Persia. And therefore at the beginning of chapter 4 we find Mordecai mourning with the Jews this terrible situation, this attempted genocide which has come against them. Queen Esther, who's in the palace, hears what's going on, and particularly she sees Mordecai dressed in sackcloth, dressed in mourning clothes, and she is concerned because no one is supposed to appear in the king's presence or near the king's presence who isn't looking joyful and well dressed, and so she offers to give him clothing, but he says no because of this terrible decree that has been made against the Jewish people. And in fact Mordecai comes back and says to Esther, will you intercede for us with the king, and maybe you can change things. Esther explains through her messengers that if she comes before the king uninvited, her life is in danger because no one is to come before the king without being invited, and she hasn't been called on for 30 days. However, Mordecai comes back to her and says, listen, don't think that you will get away with it if you're in the king's house, because your life is also at stake, and therefore you need to see that maybe you've come to royalty, maybe you've been made queen for such a time as this. And God, if you don't act, God will raise up deliverance for his people from somewhere else. So Esther bravely goes back to Mordecai and says, all right, but I want you to fast, I want the people to fast, and we will fast here in the palace for 3 days, and I will go unbidden into the king's presence. So at the beginning of chapter 5, Esther goes into the king's presence, and he sees her, and beautifully he reaches out his golden scepter, which is the sign of acceptance, to her, and calls her over to him and asks her what it is she wants. Well, the first thing she does is she invites him to dinner, and she invites Haman to dinner, and Haman and has them both come and just have a meal to enjoy the food. She's not going to ask him at that point. She has in mind to have another dinner the next day. So while they're at dinner, and the king says, what is it you want? She says, will you come again with Haman, and then I will tell you what it is I want. Now Haman, because of this invitation, is feeling so puffed up and pleased with himself because he's actually been invited to a private dinner with the queen and the king. And he goes home and tells his wife Zeresh all about this, and he crows about all that the king's done for him, all of the riches he has, and how proud he is of himself. Now in chapter 6, King Xerxes is troubled in the night. He can't sleep. He's thinking about something that he should do, and he calls for the books of the chronicles, what are called in Hebrew the Zichronot Divrei Yamim, which means the remembrances of the matters of the days, so the journals of what his reign has consisted of. And he finds there the account of Mordecai's deliverance of him from the hands of the 2 assassins, when Mordecai unveiled the plot to kill him, and actually through Queen Esther informed him and rescued him. And therefore Xerxes wants to do something to honour Mordecai. Haman doesn't know this, and King Xerxes asks Haman, what should I do for the man who the king honours? Now Haman, being so proud, thinks the king is talking about himself, so he thinks of what would I really like to be done for me. He says, oh, if you would put fine clothes on me and parade me through the streets on the king's horse and let everyone know that this is how the king honours the man who he favours. However, then the king says, right, I want to do this for Mordecai the Jew. Go to the gate, get him, and parade him through the streets. So Haman does this thing, and the tables are turned against Haman as he parades Mordecai through the streets. Now, ironically, when he went home to Zeresh, he complained about Mordecai still being there and not bowing to him. and Zeresh suggested having a 75-foot high gallows built for Mordecai, so that when the day comes when the Jews are killed, Mordecai is going to be hanged on it. However, here's a complete turnaround where Haman is parading Mordecai through the streets, and there's a warning that comes at the end of the chapter there, where it says, this looks as if things are going to turn against you. This looks as if things are not going to go well for you, Haman, because of what's happened with Mordecai being honoured by the king. And then in chapter 7, there is this dinner. The Queen Esther calls Haman and the king to a dinner again, and here she reveals what's being done, that her people have been sold. She reveals herself as a Jew, and her people have been sold, and she asks the king for deliverance. And the king says, who has done this? Who's dared to try and do away with my queen? And says, it's him, evil Haman. And the king is so incensed, he's so angry, that he commands for Haman to be taken away and arrested. Haman tries to intercede for his life. He pleads for his life with Queen Esther, but in the process he falls on her bed, and when the king sees it, he thinks that Haman is trying to make an attempt to rape her, and so the king immediately has Haman arrested and hanged on the gallows that he has had set up for Mordecai. It's a very fast-moving story, this. It's a very engaging story. It's a very exciting story. But the one thing that we see through it is that God will protect his people. Even when it looks dangerous for them, God is moving to move in for their rescue. Particularly with Esther. Esther is prepared to put herself on the line. She's prepared to entrust herself to God. Notice in these chapters the place of prayer, the place of fasting, the place of calling out to God, the place of expressing need. When we get into terrible situations where we feel oppressed, where we feel under pressure, if we call out to God, if we turn our faces towards him, we can see situations change, just as Esther did with her people. Have a very good August the 19th.